Friends, it's a great privilege to welcome you all to this extraordinary opportunity to hear from one of the leading political minds working in the United States today. I'm Ian Markham. I'm the Dean and President of Virginia Theological Seminary. And it is a seminary. We're a place of formation where we seek to allow the Holy Spirit to shape our lives so we can be vehicles of love and grace. So given that, I'm going to ask the student body president, please, to come forward and lead us in a word of prayer.
Good morning, and thank you, Dean Markham. I would like to share with you one of my favorite prayers from the Book of Common Worship. The Lord be with you. Let us pray for our human family. Almighty God, your glory shines throughout the world. We commend you for your merciful care of our nation, state, and community, that we may live securely in peace and may be guided by your providence. Give all in authority the wisdom and strength to know your will and to do it. Help them remember that they are called to serve the people as lovers of truth and justice. Through Jesus Christ our Lord, let all assembled say, Amen.
Perhaps the most radical idea in the history of ideas is the idea that every single person is made in the image of God. Whether you're poor and powerless, whether you're fortunate and rich, each person has infinite value. And that idea in the history of ideas has been an extraordinary factor in the commitment of the Church to support all people so that they might indeed participate fully in civic society. Therefore, the work of justice and faith, reconciliation, transforming society is not an incidental addition to the gospel, it's right at its heart. In that spirit, we're delighted that we have Senator Tim Kaine with us, and we're looking forward to the conversation today. This seminary is responsible for approximately 1/3 of the clergy who serve in the Episcopal Church, who train in residential theological education. It is a seminary that's now on the cusp of 200 years old. It's a seminary that's had to do its own work of reflecting on the challenge of ensuring that we live out that fundamental gospel value of the Imago Dei, that we recognize the intrinsic dignity of all people. So just for a few minutes, I've asked our Director of Multicultural Ministries, the Reverend Dr. Joseph Thompson, to come and address us about our reparations program. Please give a very warm welcome to Joe.
Good morning. It is my privilege to give a brief overview of our reparations program that I direct along with my colleague, Ebony Davis. I never thought that there would be, in my lifetime, a serious conversation about providing reparations to the descendants of enslaved persons in the United States of America. But as Dr. King knew very well, God has a way of moving mountains. It is amazing to me that this conversation about reparations has extended beyond the Black community into the white community with significant support among white Americans. VTS announced in September of 2019 a $1.7 million endowment, the yield of which would be used to fund reparations for the descendants both of persons who were enslaved at VTS and of Black people who worked here during the era of legal segregation. Former seminary archivist Chris Pote and I started the process of implementing the program by contacting genealogical expert and public historian Char McCargo-Baugh. She had already conducted a lot of research with Black families in the nearby neighborhood with known historical ties to Virginia Theological Seminary. Char has done an enormous amount of work to document their histories, tracing with their cooperation their connections to VTS back in time as far as she can. I cannot go a step further without expressing our gratitude to the families themselves for agreeing to journey with VTS in this process. They have willingly shared their amazingly rich family histories and memories and documents. They came last year for a descendant gathering on campus, and we're planning an even fancier event this June. And the families want to help VTS figure out how to best memorialize their ancestors on campus. I think it's important to name those families. The Adams, Caseys, Henrys, Johnsons, McKnights, Roys, Sims, Stranges, Terrells, Thomases, Toms, and Wanzers. And we're joined today by one of the descendants, the Reverend Linda Thomas. Thank you, Reverend Thomas, for being with us this morning. In addition to Char-Baugh's research, genealogical expert Elizabeth Drimbus and historians Maddie McCoy and Chris Milko work from the other direction. That is, they use historical records to determine the names of individuals who labored here during slavery or in the late 19th century, and then they move forward in time to seek living descendants. They have been able to find quite a few names, and in some instances, they have basic information about what labor those individuals did here and even which household they lived in. It is a distinctive feature of our program that what we call descendant shareholders are allotted a specific share off of the draw of the reparations endowment annually in perpetuity. We have already made financial disbursements to members of the 12 families that I mentioned earlier. Roughly 100 descendants have received their first annual disbursement, and about 36 of that 100 have received their second. And they get to decide what they want to do with those funds. It is not a one-size-fits-all program in that respect. Essentially, VTS is creating a trust for and with the descendant families. Now, the fund is admittedly small. VTS has always said that this is a seed that should grow. It will, of course, grow as the larger institutional endowment grows, because it's part of that endowment. And the VTS leadership has already earmarked more than an additional $500,000 to add to the initial reparations endowment. In closing, or as I head to closing, I would like to mention that there are other significant aspects of the program. VTS has allocated separate funds to provide reparations to 2 churches in Alexandria that have historical connections to the seminary, namely Oakland Baptist Church and Meade Memorial Episcopal Church. And we are in the process of building connections with the leadership of those 2 churches. There are also funds allocated to provide small grants to historically Black congregations in the Episcopal Church, especially those that are led by Black alums of VTS. And there are also funds for small social justice grants. I want to thank again all of those persons and families that I've mentioned in this presentation. And finally would like to say that we have tried to create a program that is decisive and takes action today, while at the same time being flexible and open for the future. May this program, in some small way, contribute to a future in which the United States of America is able to tell the full truth of our history and take concrete steps to redress the long overdue grievances of so many whose communities have been sorely oppressed. Thank you again for your time, attention, and interest.
The work of telling the complete story of our past is very much part of the program around reparations. It isn't sufficient just to apologize for the past and commit to a different future. We do need to do the work of understanding those forgotten names who served on this campus and honoring those whose estates were disadvantaged by the inability of those who came before them to earn what they should have done for their labor. And this work continues into the present and the future. And it's my great pleasure now to invite Donna Arundel, who will announce the senior class gift. Donna, please.
Thank you, and good morning. Senator Kaine, we welcome you on behalf of the senior class here of 2022. And I'd like to announce our senior class gift. As a result of racial unrest in our country, our class was very much on the ground, ready to serve, ready to give our hands, our feet, our minds, our hearts to our community as well as our campus to move in the direction of reconciliation and justice. And as a result of that, the class of 2022 has established the Justice and Reconciliation Society. We are in the process of tying up some issues with our student government, not really issues, but just the support of having it passed, put into the standing rules. And so we are proud to say that we are establishing and giving a gift to VTS for the society. It is a Justice and Reconciliation Society. It comes with the spirit of Amos 5:24. We want justice to roll on, and we want it to roll on in righteousness, in reconciliation, and in peace. Thank you.
It is my great privilege and pleasure now to ask the Reverend Dr. David Beckman, the Dean's Advisor for Political and Economic Justice, previously responsible for the organization Bread of the World, to come now and introduce our speaker, Senator Tim Kaine. David.
Senator Kaine started his working life as the director of a Jesuit technical school in Honduras. He was helping kids there develop skills that would allow them to earn a living. And then when he came back to Virginia, he was a civil rights lawyer. He also was a teacher. At some point, he decided to run for city council, and that started a whole new thing. He is one of 30 people in the history of this country who have served as mayor, governor, and U.S. senator. And he's represented the Commonwealth of Virginia in the U.S. Senate since 2013. Since I did faith-based advocacy on the Hill for several decades, I have watched Senator Kaine, and I know he's a faithful Catholic and that his legislative priorities reflect Catholic social teaching. I just read that he's trying, and they're putting together the appropriations for what we're going to do on COVID as a nation over the coming year. And the president's asked for money to continue helping to make vaccinations available to people in the poorest countries of the world. That's controversial, and Senator Kaine is, I think, the lead voice in that group trying to make that happen. It's just one more example of what you do. I also want to thank you for your role in what Congress has done during the pandemic to reduce poverty. I don't think very many people realize that our nation has managed to reduce poverty during the pandemic. I mean, there's been a lot of hardship, a lot of disruption. Everybody, the people afraid that they're going to be thrown out of their homes. A lot of suffering. I don't want to minimize that. But we know now, census data is available, and so we know that because of the major public investments that Congress has been able to negotiate during the pandemic, because of that, the percentage of Americans in poverty declined in 2020 and declined again in 2021. And that has especially benefited people of color, disproportionately benefited people of color. So there's a bit of the spirit of reparation in what the U.S. Congress has been able to do together in the last couple of years. And Senator Kaine has been crucial in all that. I think we'd be especially interested to hear about whether it's going to be possible to rescue some of the really powerful economic and racial justice provisions that came to the U.S. Senate in December of last year. And they were defeated by one vote. Just in that package, you know this, but I want to say it here to everybody. In that package was an extension of the expanded child tax credit. We saw that work for about 6 months. And the rate of child poverty in America dropped by 30% in the second half of last year. But then all of our Republican senators and Senator Joe Manchin of West Virginia voted to let it and other things expire. And so the data is there that the rate of child poverty, hungry poverty, surged again in January. I just can't understand how you can see something work and then let it go. And so Senator Kaine is, I know you were governor of Virginia when Senator Manchin was governor of West Virginia, that you have a deep relationship with him. And I'm just sure you're trying to get to a bill, a big economic bill, including some of those things from December, that can pass the U.S. Senate. So I think we'd all be it's an urgent and really important issue, and I think we'd all be interested to hear you tell us what you can about what's happening, and then also tell us what we can do. I think you may not know that VTS seminarians are almost all rooted in dioceses across the country. So I hope a lot of them are voting for you, but some of them are voting in their home dioceses. So if you can give us ideas about how we can help you, I'd be really grateful. And mainly, I want to say thank you for being here. Senator Tim Kaine.
How gracious. Ian, thank you for this opportunity. David, thank you. Well, David, thank you for those kind words and encouragement. And Ian, thank you for this opportunity. And to all who have gathered, it's such an honor to come on a beautiful Monday as we approach Easter. And we see beautiful weather and crocuses, but we don't have to think too hard about the meaning of the Easter season. We'll pass 1 million deaths to COVID right about the time we get to Easter Sunday. So this might be a different Easter than any I've ever experienced in my life. My church is back in the sanctuary, which we weren't a year ago. But everyone in my small parish in Richmond has been deeply, deeply affected by COVID. Not all affected equally, to be sure. But, you might just, I'm sure all of you, just thinking in your own mind's eye about people you know who passed, or people who've been sick, or people who've lost jobs, or people whose businesses have closed, or neighbors who died unrelated to COVID, but you couldn't go to the funeral because there hadn't yet been a funeral, or maybe a grandchild that was born in a city and you couldn't travel to see the grandchild. So the accumulated weight of the last 2 years is a reality, even on a beautiful sunny day as we approach the Easter season. So I was very happy to be asked. David asked if I would do a 20-minute Zoom with you, and I said, well, better yet, I drive up from Richmond every Monday morning. Can I just come? Because I've driven by VTS campus often, but not had the opportunity to dialogue with you before. I have 3 wonderful staffers with me, Gaston Aros, who's worked with me since I came to the Senate, running one of my 2 Northern Virginia offices, Connor, who is a University of Mary Washington student, intern in my office, and then Janine, my press secretary. So I'm really happy to have them with me. What I thought I would do is 3 things. I want to do a thank you. I want to tell you a little bit about my own journey, and then I want to talk about what's up right now, things I'm working on, things that are important in the Senate, and that will address David's prompt. But then I want to open it up, and I think the real fun part of this will be the Q&A. And Q&A is not just question and answer. The A also stands for advice. I want advice. I'll steal a good idea from anyone, So when we get into the discussion, I really want to hear what's on your mind and get advice about things that I should focus on. First, a thank you. Thank you to VTS. VTS will celebrate its bicentennial next year. And it's been on a journey. Just like each of us are on personal journeys, VTS has been on a journey. I don't know that much about VTS, but just the few things I know, the growth of this institution, the number of people it's trained to preach and inspire the gospel, the takeover of the campus during the Civil War, and it was used as a Union hospital and Union gathering place and HQ, the decision of VTS to integrate, too late in some ways, but much earlier than others in 1951, 1952, that VTS has also welcomed women to ministry in a way that makes me feel envious as a Catholic. One of the reasons I stay in my church, which I love, is a belief that we need to stay in the church and hope that women one day will be accorded equal opportunity in ministry in the Catholic Church, just as in many churches, including the Episcopal Church, they are now. And as part of this journey, the reparations, reconciliation, social justice ministry announced by the senior class, embraced by VTS, is just part of the journey. One of the things I love about any institution is it's not static. We're not static as people. VTS isn't static. The U.S. Senate isn't static. The United States isn't static. Christianity isn't static. One of my favorite hymns we sing in church is, I want Jesus to walk with me. I want Jesus to walk with me all along this pilgrim journey. I want Jesus to walk with me. It's a journey. It's a journey. VTS has been on a journey. We've all been on journeys. And so thank you for having me come and connect with you at a moment on your journey and to hear about initiatives of importance. My journey is this, simply, and then I'll get to sort of what's up right now. I grew up in a very Irish Catholic household. 7 of my 8 great-grandparents were born in Ireland. The 8th was born in Scotland to Irish parents, and then they all moved to the U.S. Diversity for me when I was a kid is if I met an Italian Catholic. That was diversity for me. And so I grew up in a very, very kind of Irish Catholic enclave and loving, supportive family in Kansas City, Jesuit educated in high school, University of Missouri, Harvard Law School. When I went to law school, I was very young. I'd gone through college in 3 years. And I started to have as friend groups people who'd taken time off. The average age for law students at that time, and it's gotten older since, was more like 26 or 27, and I was 21. And I decided, why am I rushing? And what do I want to do with my life? And I didn't really know because I didn't know any lawyers. What do I want to do with my life? So I recalled missionaries that I had met when I was in my Jesuit high school, Rockhurst High School in Kansas City, and I wrote to them and said, can I come volunteer with you in Honduras, where the Missouri province of the Jesuits had a mission set up for many, many years. And they said, sure, come on down. we'll always take a volunteer. And so I took a year off of law school, and I went to Honduras, and I started the beginning of the academic year, September, and I stayed the whole academic year there. I got there, and they said, okay, what do you know how to do? I said, I'm at Harvard Law School. They said, that's precisely worthless here. That doesn't mean anything. I said, my dad's a welder, and they said, okay, now you're talking. They had just opened a school, the Instituto Técnico Loyola. There was a priest in training who was their first principal, who was about to leave to go to Panama to complete theological studies. And they said, you work with Juan Ramiro for 30 days, and then you're going to be the principal. Okay, my 4 years of high school Spanish needed some brushing up, and I crash coursed it, sink or swim in 30 days, and then I ran this school that taught kids to be welders and carpenters. The school still exists. I go back and visit it. It's grown from 20 kids into about 500 kids in a town, El Progreso, Honduras, which has grown from 30,000 now to about 120,000 in the years since I left. But I became very impassioned during that time, and obviously I was looking for the still small voice, like what should I do with my life? That, okay, I should go back to law school and I should finish, and then I should use my talents to benefit others. Broadly defined, I don't know exactly what that means. I came across during that year in Honduras, as I was reading, a phrase that really made a huge impact on my life. The phrase of Dr. King's, the most segregated hour of the week is 11 a.m. Sunday morning. And so when I came back, I continued to practice Catholicism, but I always looked for churches in the African-American community. The African-American history within the American Catholic Church is a fascinating one where people have often suffered discrimination after discrimination, but still held fast. And so the small parish that I worship at in Richmond, St. Elizabeth's of Hungary, it was in a primarily German-speaking neighborhood set up in the 1920s, but by the time my wife and I came to Richmond to get married in the 1980s, now primarily an African-American parish. We moved to Richmond. Civil rights work was what I did. My wife's a legal aid lawyer. I primarily represented people who'd been turned away from housing because of race or family status or disability. And then one day I had the experience that all of you have had. I got mad at city council. Wherever you live in a city or county, there's something happens and you get mad at local officials. I'd never had any thought of being in politics myself, although my wife's family is very political. My wife's dad was the first Republican elected governor of Virginia in 1969. Linwood Holton. And immediately after he was elected, he integrated the public schools of Virginia that Democrats had kept segregated. And as a result, he got frozen out of politics the rest of his life. He was an ex-governor at age 49 and never could get elected to anything else because it was so unpopular what he did then. He just died at age 98. And I wish he could have read the tributes that people wrote to him, because now everybody thinks, man, what a wonderful guy. What a fantastic governor. Live long enough and, that's the best revenge. But anyway, practiced law, got mad, ran for city council, and here I am nearly 30 years later, 28 years later. I've been a two-term city councilman, two-term mayor, 2 terms in state government, lieutenant governor and governor, 2 years as President Obama's hand-picked chairman of the Democratic National Committee, and now 2 terms in the U.S. Senate. It's been quite a journey. It's been quite a journey, and I'm not done with the journey. I'm still on the journey. I'm still figuring things out. And the one thing I'll say as I close this piece and then move on to what are we up to is I do what I do because of my faith. And I do what I do because of a commitment I made to myself when I was in Honduras. And I do what I do because of the influence of my parish. And I do what I do because of the influence of my wife, who is a really faith-filled, dedicated public servant, legal aid lawyer, juvenile court judge. When she was First Lady, she reformed the foster care system in the state. She has been a teacher and interim president at George Mason. She was Virginia Secretary of Education. She currently sits on the State Board of Education over K-12 curriculum issues, which are hot right now, very, very hot in Virginia. Can we talk about reparations? Can we talk about reconciliation? Can we talk about our history honestly? Can we talk about social justice? So she is a great anchor for me in what I do. But the journey I'm on often makes me think, in connection, we have 3 children and 2 are artists, that politics and religion and art have a really important similarity, which is if human beings didn't have an instinctive understanding that there was a gap between what is and what could be, I'm not sure we'd have politics. I'm not sure we'd have religion or spirituality, and I'm not sure we would have art either. It seems like people have an instinctive understanding born in us, and I think this is a spiritual understanding, that what is not all that could be. That what could be much better than what is. And in that space between our recognition of our daily reality, whether it's in the life of a person or the life of a society, and our kind of glimpse, sometimes through a glass darkly, about what we could be, I think that's sort of the space where spirituality and art and politics operates. It's probably not a good thing to say to seminarians to compare your religious mission with my political one. It's a little bit of a mixture of the sacred and the profane, but I do think there are some similarities in what we do, because I tell you this, if everything was fine, there'd be no need to run for office. There'd be no need to be in politics. There might be no need to preach great sermons from the Gospels or lessons from the Old Testament or the Quran or other spiritual wisdom. So this journey that we're on together, whether it's political or artistic or spiritual, I think we're tied in trying to be better than we are today. What's up right now? My priorities in the Senate, and we tend to specialize, you can't do everything. The reason you have a great staff is so that you can sort of do everything with their help, but we all come into it with particular passions. My passions are civil rights and the role of America in the world. Now, there's a lot of things I didn't say, but civil rights and the role of America in the world are two pretty broad umbrellas. So I didn't say climate change, but climate change is a civil rights issue, it's an equity issue, and it's also a role of America in the world issue. I didn't say immigration, but immigration is a civil rights issue, and it's also a role of America in the world issue. But as I think about my own mission when I walk into the office every day, it's usually in those two spaces, sort of civil rights, the role of America in the world. In the Senate, we tend to focus on our committees, and I have two committees that are domestic and two committees that are role of America in the world. I'm on the Budget Committee and I'm on the Health, Education, Labor, Pension Committee. Civil rights issues, kind of traditionally defined, go through the Judiciary Committee. I'm not on that, although I've often been a leader in efforts to do voting rights work, because I'm one of the few people in the Senate that did voting rights work as a civil rights lawyer. But even though I'm not on the Judiciary Committee, what's more civil rights focused than health care or education or labor rights or pensions, retirement security? So the Help Committee that I'm on is very much a civil rights committee where we're grappling with equity issues all the time. And then the role of America in the world, I'm on the Armed Services Committee and I'm on the Foreign Relations Committee. So I look at all the challenges, Ukraine, South Sudan, Ethiopia, Yemen, Burma. I look at these challenges through a military lens. How do we keep our country safe? But I also look at them through a diplomatic lens. Can we beat a sword into a plowshare? Can we figure out a diplomatic resolution that will bring people together, informed by a reality that is a wonderful thing about our history, is that we've often turned enemies into friends. I mean, Japan is a close ally of the United States right now. Germany is a close ally of the United States. We were at war with them not long before I was born. And so as I think about challenges with Iran, for example, or Russia or Ukraine or North Korea, I don't assume that a nation that is in an adversarial position with us right now need always be. We have a fairly close relationship with Vietnam right now, even though we have significant differences of opinion. So our history does show that we can beat swords into plowshares with grace and time and effort and focus. And so in working on national security issues, I try to bring that to the table. David asked about the prospects for meaningful legislation going forward in the Senate on one area, and I'm actually going to talk about two. The economic bill, it's called a reconciliation bill. It's funny, we call in the Senate reconciliation the most partisan thing. So we use it a little differently than you guys use reconciliation here at VTS. Reconciliation is a quirky budgetary procedure under Senate rules that allow certain kinds of bills to be passed with a simple majority. In the Senate, a challenge is normally to get legislation passed, you need 60 votes. We have a Democratic majority, the narrowest possible, 50 with the vice president as a tiebreaker, but you need 60 to pass most legislation, with the exception of something called budget reconciliation. And I think the thinking about this back in 1974 is, yeah, you should have to get 60, but you need a budget. So if it's about a budget, you should be able to do it with 50 votes. And it's a limited procedure that is really quirky, and you basically can do about one of these bills a year. But naturally, if you can't get 60 and you have priorities that you want to get done, you look to see whether you can fit it within a budget reconciliation framework and find 50 votes for it. We passed a bill last March, a little bit over a year ago, the American Rescue Plan. First Saturday in March, we passed it. That was a massive and far-reaching, and in my view, very, very positive piece of legislation that accomplished the objectives that David said. It did many things, but one objective was to dramatically reduce the youth poverty rate. It's not a good sign in a nation where the youth poverty rate is double the adult poverty rate. That's not a good sign. You know, that's not a good sign. That is significantly the case in the United States, and so we did a child tax credit that was a refundable tax credit for families with kids of low and moderate income, and it dramatically, by 30% in 1 year, reduced the youth poverty rate in the United States. But when we did the bill, the only way we could get 50 votes on that bill was to have it as a program that went through the end of the calendar year, December, and then expired. And that put pressure on our shoulders to, okay, it's going to expire at the end of December. Can we find a path forward to continue it? And the answer was we couldn't. We have one colleague, a colleague I know very, very well, Senator Manchin, who thinks it encourages dependency. Basically, that's his argument, and so he is against it. We've gone to him and said, hey, we don't mind putting we're not interested in encouraging dependency. We're interested in reducing poverty. And so we can put guardrails up around it and have checks as in other federal programs. Thus far, we have not been able to convince him to get on board with the extension of the child tax credit. But we're not stopping. So this budget reconciliation vehicle, where if we could get all Democrats on board, and why all Democrats? Republicans have, even though there are many pieces in the bill that they like, so when we passed the American Rescue Plan, it passed by one vote. It passed by one vote. Every Republican voted against it, even though there were many pieces in it that they liked. And their argument was sort of, okay, that's right, you guys can do it if you want. We did our bill, the tax cut bill in 2017, by one vote too. It was all Republicans and Democrats against it. So these programs are your priorities, not ours. And even if there are pieces of it they don't like the size of it, they don't like other aspects of it. And we will get 0 votes on the Republican side, 0, on the version that we're working on now. But what we're trying to do is see from grand ideas that some of us have, what could we do that is really core, really, really core, that would help accomplish the goals, David, that you mentioned. And this would be extremely helpful. In the good news is those of you in Richmond don't have to lean on Warner and me too hard, because we're very much engaged trying to get this done. But from other states, if you have ties in West Virginia, if you have ties in Arizona, or any other state, because what we need to do is take a bill that was proposed at a size and find the core of it that will do the most good. As a member of the HELP committee, the things that I'm working on the most are early childhood education. Because if you think about what really hits people's pocketbook, if we could do universal pre-kindergarten for every 3- and 4-year-old in this country, universally available and free, like kindergarten is free, may not be mandatory, like you have to have your 3- and 4-year-old in the program, but it should be free, like kindergarten is free. Kindergarten was established before we understood the brain development, how much of it happens before age 5. So why don't we take advantage of what we know about the brain, move it earlier, do universal pre-K, and then also provide significant assistance for childcare, whether it's public, private, church-based, faith-based, run by a Head Start, run by a YM or WCA, run by a Boys or Girls Club. Let's do something. I live in Richmond. My kids are 32, 30, and 26, but I can remember what child care cost when they were little ones. And I've talked to my staffers like Gaston about what child care costs in Northern Virginia right now. You have a child care facility here with a long waiting list of people who want to be in this facility because of the quality. But the cost of it just makes it unsustainable for so many families. So as we're grappling with inflation, if we could do something on the child care front that would really, really help people, if we could, in the core of this bill, do something to bring down the cost of prescription drugs, maybe bring down the cost of health care premiums. We did subsidies for health care premiums under the Affordable Care Act, but that is also scheduled to expire at the end of September unless we find an extension. So I would love to put together a Build Back Better bill, a reconciliation bill that would be child care, prescription drugs, and health care subsidies. Those are 3 big ticket items for most families. If we can't get Senator Manchin on the child tax credit extension, some of these first 3 things would help the same families who would benefit by that. And so I don't think we're going to be able to persuade Joe on the child tax credit extension, but I think we can persuade him on some of these, and that's what we're trying to do. The last issue I want to say that I want to open up is in the civil rights space, and it's really 2 things. It's the confirmation vote in the Judiciary Committee today for Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson, and hopefully vote on the floor by the end of the week, and also the larger quest for voting rights. The judge is going to be confirmed. I am meeting with her in my office this afternoon. I never come out and announce a position on a Supreme Court justice until I've met with them. I told her, I'm not on judiciary. You should meet with the Judiciary Committee members first. You can put me at the end of the line if you want. I'm really excited about the opportunity to visit with her this afternoon, and I suspect sometime tomorrow I'll be announcing where I am. But I believe strongly she is going to be confirmed, and I think it's really, really important that she be confirmed. History maker, first African-American woman on the court. I think maybe more people have focused on the fact that she's an African-American woman than just focus just on the woman part of it. When I was in law school, there were no women on the Supreme Court. None. We will have 4 women on the Supreme Court. And to go from 0 ever to 4 in the life of, one lawyer's practice life does show that while there's a lot of stuff we still have to do, we are making progress in areas that are really important. So that the prospect of 4 women on the Supreme Court really excites me. Also, as a civil rights lawyer, I'll be blunt, a lot of Supreme Court justices are kind of like philosopher queens and kings. There aren't a lot of who tried cases, had to pick a jury, had to decide whether to put a client on the stand to testify, had to decide what to object to, had to ask a judge to recuse himself, had to write up jury instructions, had to sweat while the jury was out wondering whether your client was going to be sent to prison or found liable in a civil case. It's much more common these days, not in the past, much more common these days for the Supreme Court justices to be more appellate, people who are looking at the record, or academics. And we've never had a public defender on the Supreme Court. So there are on the Supreme Court now, I think Justices Gorsuch and Alito did try cases as prosecutors. And that's a very important expertise to have on the Supreme Court. But why not somebody, and there really hasn't been anyone since Justice Marshall was on the court, who's represented defendants and sat there sweating while a jury was out, knowing that their client's not only liberty, but life was on the line. She's had that. So she's also been a trial judge who's had to impanel jurors and instruct them and make decisions on the fly about evidentiary rulings and do things that a lot of the only other trial court judge on the court is Sonia Sotomayor. So she would be only the 2nd out of 9. And I think that's an important skill set. So it's a really important nomination for a number of reasons. My biggest disappointment of the last 2 years in the Senate has been, and this is funny, it's more disappointing when you have a majority and you can't do what you want than when you're in minority in some ways. When you're in the minority, it's frustrating every day. But we have a majority now, and we fell short on voting rights. We fell short on voting rights. We need to do a voting rights bill, particularly if, biblically you're supposed to look for the signs of the times. This 100 senators are the only senators out of the 2,000 who've ever served in the body who were there when the body was attacked violently. to disenfranchise 80 million people. That's what the January 6th attack was about. It was to interrupt the peaceful transfer of power and essentially disenfranchise the 80 million people who had voted for Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. And so it seems like if we're going to be true to the moment, the 100 people who are there should say, wow, what's the right response to this? We're the only people who are here suffering under that. What's the right response? The right response is to put guardrails and protections in place so that nobody will be disenfranchised. Chuck Schumer called me. I was canoeing on the river, James River, last summer, and he called, and I got off the river, and I said, what's up? He goes, I need you to try to get Joe Manchin on the voting rights bill. You were governor with him. You know Joe very, very well. I said, I do. You're friends. I said, we are. He's the only Democrat who is not a co-sponsor of the For the People Act, which was the voting rights bill at that time. So I worked together with Joe for months, and we made changes to the bill. It was now called the Freedom to Vote Act. We dropped some things that he didn't like. We added some things. He had some good ideas. We added. And we got to a place where he signed on to co-sponsor the bill in September. And then as penalty for having succeeded in one task, Schumer gave me another. Okay, we only have 50. We need 60. Or we need to consider whether Senate rules are more important than protecting the franchise. And if they aren't, can we make adjustments to Senate rules to enable us to pass a voting rights bill? And so we worked from September through January, first to see if we could get Republican co-sponsors of our voting rights bill, willing to change it, willing to entertain endless amendments. You know, we'll do anything if we can get you on board. And when it became clear that we could not get not one co-sponsor, then we set about trying to figure out, consistent with the history of the Senate, could we restore the filibuster to what it used to be? If you ever saw the movie Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, if you wanted to stop the majority of the Senate from acting, then you took the floor and you held it, and you either convinced your colleagues to change their mind, or at some point when you were through talking, the Senate would act by majority vote to do what it was expected to do. There's nothing about a 60-vote threshold or supermajority threshold in the Constitution, except for ratification of treaties and impeachment. That's in the Constitution, supermajority in the Senate. The implication is that everything else should be by simple majority, but the Senate has erected rules to thwart that intent, and those rules have most often been used to thwart civil rights legislation. But our effort came to naught in January when we could, though we had all Democrats on board with the bill, and a vice president who would have broken a tie to make sure it passed, we could not get two Democrats, Senators Manchin or Sinema, to make the rules adjustments that I helped write with Jeff Merkley of Oregon, that I really felt like were consistent with the history of the Senate, not a dramatic departure. It would have been a restoration of what was intended and what was true during most of the Senate's history. How disappointing. I mean, I've never been more disappointed, with the exception of falling short on gun safety measures in the aftermath of the Sandy Hook shooting. And when we voted that day, I had Virginia Tech families. I was governor during the shooting at Virginia Tech, a scarring event in my life. And I had Virginia families sitting up in the gallery next to, holding hands of Sandy Hook families. And it reminded me of the letter to the Hebrews, surrounded by a great cloud of witnesses. And we fell short. The voting rights day in January felt like that day. But, as you all know, who are my age or maybe even a little bit older, the battle for voting rights in the Senate of the United States never like one and done. We got it. I mean, it was try, fail, try, fail, try, fail, try, get just a piece. In 1964, the Civil Rights Act of 64, which was Title VII, employment protection, et cetera, there was a voting rights component to that got stripped out in order to enable the other pieces to pass. But the advocates didn't say, they sunk our voting rights bill. They said, we're coming back next year. And then the Voting Rights Act of 1965 passed. So the history of the Senate on many of these civil rights issues is arcane Senate rules were put up as a barrier. People with passion about moving forward don't go away. And the thing that seemed the barrier yesterday becomes not insuperable, but knocked down next year. And so we're having to strategize in the midst of an election year, and who knows what the Senate will be or the House will be. We're having to strategize about how we can come back to that. So I guess the last thing I'll say is I have been on a little bit of a personal pilgrimage that I decided after I got reelected in 2018. I'd been in office for 25 years, and I wanted to do something to recharge and reflect. And so I created a little pilgrimage that I called the Virginia Nature Triathlon, and I did it 3 years in a row. 2019, I hiked from Harpers Ferry to the Tennessee border on the Appalachian Trail, 560 miles. 2020, I bicycled the Blue Ridge Parkway and Skyline Drive, 320 miles. And this year, I canoed the whole James River from Iron Gate in Allegheny County to Fort Monroe, where 20 and odd Africans came ashore in 1619. Slaves captured by the English off a Dutch ship brought into the English colonies. Slaves until they set foot on Virginia soil. And as soon as they set foot on Virginia soil, they were enslaved because they'd been pulled against their will, but there was no slavery in England. And there was no slavery in Virginia. And so they were sort of like human question marks. And the earliest Virginians had to decide, and it took them about 40 years to decide, the status of these people who were also legal question marks. It was an amazing journey to be wrapped up in Virginia nature, but also wrapped up in our story and our narrative. And over the course of it, when I started, I didn't know that I'd be living through a pandemic and 2 impeachment trials and a violent attack on the Capitol and righteous protests against for racial justice inspired by the murder of George Floyd or the desire to take down statues on Monument Avenue where I live. So all of that happened during this pilgrimage. And I was thinking recently, having completed it just a couple months ago, like, what would I say about the state of the nation during the time between when I started this and when I finished? And the Rorschach word that came to my mind was humbling. Pandemic, attack, death, impeachment trials. Humbling is a word whose root means grounded. And here's a challenge that I'm grappling with right now as I conclude. Humility is a virtue. He who exalts himself shall be humbled. He who humbles himself shall be exalted. The Bible is filled with those reversals. The last shall come first, the first will come last. Wisdom of the world is foolishness in the eyes of God. The Bible is filled with these reversals. And we do deeply believe that humility is a virtue, but not really in politics. We want to say about ourselves that we're great. We want to say our nation is indispensable. We want to say our nation is exemplary. If humility is an individual virtue, can it not also be the case that it should be a societal or national virtue? And so one of my things I'm thinking about since I've finished this journey is, can we inject kind of a political life or political identity with more humility without being less confident of or assertive of or positive about the values that we share? And that's just a thought, kind of a thought and reflection problem that I'm grappling with. But thank you for letting me have the chance to come today and just share with you. And now I really want to open it up and take questions and take advice. Thank you. And the only thing I'll ask is if please introduce yourself as you ask a question.
Good morning, everyone.
Hang on, sir. We've got a mic
Mike, coming your way.
because we've got it being live streamed. A warm welcome to all those on the live stream. And yes, please.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Senator. Good to see you again, sir.
Thank you.
First, my name is MacArthur Myers. I'm a citizen of Alexandria.
Yeah.
And I don't have a question, but I just wanted to stand and applaud the seminary, applaud the committee for what you're doing. I work along with Char Barr, so familiar with Char and Maddie McCoy. Great, you got a great team there. So I just want to say what you're doing is a great thing, not only for the city, but you're setting the tone for the nation. You're setting a standard and a bar. You may not get it all the way, nation, but at least you have a footprint out there ahead of you to trying to show you the way. And Senator, good to see you again, and I thank you, and I'll give you some energy since you're on this journey. Some of you may or may not know, but when he was a young lawyer, if you go to Potomac Yard, you see the result of his legalese and his skills level, because that was scheduled to be where the stadium was, but by his tenacity, he was able to help see what we see today. Thank you. I just
Thank
wanted
you
to
so
say
much.
that.
Thank you. Good to see you again. Please.
Can you wait for the mic?
My goal will be always to call on people very far apart so that this guy really has to just exercise vigorously.
Only at a theological seminary, I think, could you ask this question without causing eye rolling, and might still. But in politics on the Hill, people would say, well, it's shirts and skins. But it's kind of become like Shiites and Sunnis, and it's not an original thought of mine, but a lot of people have been saying that politics is sort of taking on the role of religion in this country, that people sort of, their red or their blue identity is kind of that intrinsic to their fundamental personality. Does that ring true to you? And what do you think we as people of faith can try to do to push back on that?
What a great question. And one question is whether people of faith are actually part of that problem, part of the polarization, and many are, frankly. It's a reality. I mean, if you were to, look at some just basic information, here's some information that tells me that politics is becoming a higher and higher part of people's identity. If you went back 50 years and you looked at the 1956 presidential race and you looked at popular vote in all the states, you would see the popular vote in most states was between like 55 and 45. Might be for Adlai Stevenson in one, and it might be for Eisenhower in the other, but most states were kind of within a band. If you look at states now, you see states that are 80 or 20, and that suggests that people are self-selecting. They're moving to places based on political identity in a way that wasn't that common earlier in our history. So I do think it's getting more intense. Now, one good thing, I think Virginia, it's not immune from that trend. But because in Virginia we don't register by party, so everybody is legally and independent, you walk into the ballot, you ask for whichever primary ballot you want to. You could ask for a Republican ballot this year and a Democratic one next year. Yes, people self-identify with parties, but I think it's a little more fluid here, and it opens up opportunities for more dialogue and working together. It's obviously a very competitive state. The Democrats had had a good run since 2009, but we lost the governorship in 2021. I don't think we're in danger of being a one-party state anytime soon. We've been kind of a one-party state in the past, and that wasn't a good thing. It wasn't a good thing. I mean, again, the Dixiecrats ran Virginia under the Byrd machine and kept the schools segregated, so no party has clean hands throughout their history. Two parties are better, and I think we're going to have that in Virginia. We do more across the aisle in the Senate than you think. We don't do enough. We do more than you think. The reason we do more than you think is because when we cooperate, it's not sexy. Conflict is sexy these days. Cooperation isn't. So the things, Mitch McConnell and I've done one bill with Mitch. We did a bill to raise the federal tobacco age from 18 to 21. We decided it's the right thing to do. We don't want non-tobacco states saying this should be done. How about two senators from tobacco states saying we need to raise the tobacco age to 21? We did that together. It was a good thing. It'll save about 250,000 lives. Didn't get a lot of attention because it was cooperative. So I think, what might you do as faith leaders? I often say to citizens of all kinds, but as faith leaders, you could do this in an interesting way. If you ever meet somebody in office, city council on up, ask them, hey, tell me something interesting you're doing with somebody on the other side of the aisle. Just ask them that question. I have a lot of colleagues who I don't think get any positive reinforcement for reaching across the aisle. I get some in Virginia because I think we're narrowly divided, and a big chunk of independents. So I do get enforcement for that. But I have a lot of colleagues who I think nobody ever asked them that question, and they don't feel like that's actually going to advance their political fortune. So if everybody kind of interested in civic life, but particularly those in leadership positions, just made it a habit, you meet somebody in office, hey, tell me something really interesting that you're working on with somebody on the other side of the aisle. If we heard that nonstop, that could move us in a better direction.
Yeah, thank you. The mics with that gentleman there, and then Rich Jones.
Please.
So, how you doing?
Good.
Senator, thank you so much for what you shared. I was really moved by everything that you shared. My name's Will Archer,
Will,
and
yes.
I'm a pastor down in Dumfries. My congregation is racially and very politically diverse, and so we've been struggling with these tensions for the past 5 or 6 years. That's a part of what drove me to come to seminary, was to try to figure out how to lead our congregation through a lot of this. What you just shared is what we found in our context. So I want to humbly offer some,
Please.
reinforce the advice
Please.
that you just gave. Our church almost divided when President Obama was elected in 2008. And we've really spent the past, 7 or 8 years intentionally working on repairing those divides. What we've found to be very helpful is inviting both Republicans and Democrats who are local elected officials to come to church and just to eat food together. So for Easter Sunday, for instance, we're doing a barbecue where we're barbecuing 1,000 pounds of meat, and we're inviting everyone to come.
Good.
And we've been doing that for a number of years. So eating together and being together has been really meaningful for our congregation. Also emphasizing the fact that, as Christians, we really do need to have a cruciformed approach, that we extend our arms to those on the left as much as we do to those on the right. And I wanted to see what could we do to amplify the things that you're saying that are not so sexy, people working together, to amplify the voices of what's happening, whether it's in the Senate or it's in the House. We're definitely trying to do that in our local community. But what can we do as faith leaders to help that effort? Because my limited study of history has said that in the past, there were more things that you did together. Y'all ate together more.
We did.
You spent more time together. But in the present, it's just gotten incredibly toxic.
Right.
As my good friend here just shared, it has been like Shiites and Sunnis, it's been true enmity. And I definitely feel as a Christian and as a faith leader that we need to bind up these wounds. What can we do to help you in your effort definitely to do that? That's what we're seeing helping our church. And just to be clear, these aren't people that are just all in the middle. Like my folks are hard right and hard left, and we both sit on the aisle, and it's a lot of late nights working it out. But that's just with a small microcosm of a small church in Dumfries. But I'd love to see that in our country, and I'd love to help in any way to see that happen for us right now.
Yeah, well, it's a really great question, and I have kind of just a Rorschach thought. But before I do, I will say one of the things I like about being a Catholic is you go to most Catholic masses and you just look at bumper stickers trying to find a parking place, you're going to see every shade of the political spectrum. And so Catholic parishes tend not to self-sort politically so much. Even at my parish, which is primarily African American, again, the bumper sticker test will tell me every Sunday that this is not just all people who are marching in lockstep on any issue. It's just, and so we're not self-selecting by politics, which is good, because that way I'm not seeing you as an opponent. Well, you're my friend. We have a disagreement, but we've been going to church together for 20 years, and we work at the men's day together. And so more opportunities to get people together. I think one of the things that we may not do enough, we do a lot of things together, but we don't go at some of the hardest issues that divide us. So let me use abortion as an example, because probably the 3 issues in my political life where I've had to grapple with Catholicism and public policy the most are abortion, the death penalty, and then war. War, defense spending, all this. These are, and I'm on the Armed Services Committee, and I'm on the Help Committee, so, the issues about sexuality, whatever, right square in my committee's wheelhouse, and I have to grapple with these all the time. So when we do stuff together, we tend, let's avoid the hard ones. Let's do something together. I had a bill last week, no president should be able to withdraw from NATO without a vote of Congress. Now, it took me 4 years to get a vote, but I did get a vote, and it was 21-1. Everybody was on board. Talk about abortion. This and taxes are the 2 biggest dividers between Dems and Republicans, probably. And this is a real hard one. It's a real hard one. I'm in the camp where I have lived pro-life my whole life, but I don't believe that I should use the law of the state and criminal law to force others to make the decisions that I would make in their circumstances. And so I have kind of I call myself kind of a pro-respecter. I'm going to respect your decision, but also respect mine. So I support the Hyde Amendment. I don't think my tax dollars should be used for abortion. So that's kind of in the space I'm in. That space, where could you find like common cause in an issue like abortion? Here's one. How about the unacceptable high rates of maternal mortality in this country? And not only unacceptably high rates, but just massive differences between Caucasian women and then Latino women and then African American women, like 3-4 times. Maternal mortality generally is measured the death of a mom during pregnancy or in the year after childbirth for any reason. It doesn't have to be related to pregnancy. The death for any reason leaves a child without a mom. And so here is this massive disparity. And even if you just don't look at the disparities, you just look at the average, we're really out of whack with other countries. Why couldn't people who are like the most pro-choice NARAL and the most pro-life Susan B. Anthony Foundation say, now here's something we can agree on. Let's get maternal mortality down to super low and let's eliminate any racial disparity in the maternal mortality space. That would be an issue. Now, I actually am a supporter of a significant number of maternal mortality bills that Senator Harris kind of championed before she became VP, and now Cory Booker and I and others are working on them. We've yet to find Republican traction with this on it, but I don't think we've really pushed hard enough. I don't think we've gone and said, hey, there's all the stuff we disagree on, but can't we agree on this? So one of the things that you guys might be able to do, faith leaders, is, and particularly of congregations that have some wide breadth, like find a solution in one of the tough areas, not in an area where everybody agrees already. In one of the tough areas, find a solution, and maybe faith congregations of different politics and different denominations could come to us on something like that. So that's just kind of off the top of the head. You've challenged me on a priority that I care about, but that I haven't done a lot of work to reach across the aisle on, but it would seem like a natural one. It seemed like a natural one.
Rich Jones, and then there was a hands.
Okay, now some women have to ask questions.
Yes,
It
no,
just
that's
can't
right.
all be guys.
Were you next? Yeah, so. Second row.
Please.
Senator, I'm Richard Jones, involved with American Friends of the Episcopal Church of the Sudans. I'm glad you mentioned Sudan among the countries that you're aware of. Do you think one of those two rival leaders, the president and the vice president, will have to take the other one out of this earth before the violence that comes from above can be stopped?
Let me be humble to say, on foreign relations, I'm an expert in one part of the world, and that's the Americas. I'm an educated layperson about other parts of the world, but I don't consider myself an expert on Sudan or Ethiopia, two of the African crises that we're sort of most focused on right now because of humanitarian dimensions, famine possibility. So I don't know the answer to that question. I do believe the United States should never say who the leader of another country should be. So, President Biden spoke from the heart when he was talking about Vladimir Putin and expressed what a lot of us are feeling, but our policy should never be who should be the leader of another country, because as soon as that's our policy, then every other country could say, well, then we're entitled to have our own view about who the leader of another country be, who the leader of the United States should be. And I think we need to let those leadership decisions be made by people in the country, even if often they can't make the decisions. They're blocked from voting, they're blocked from participating, so there may be no legitimacy to someone who's a leader. Still, the U.S. shouldn't be able to say who the leader is. In the past, we've often done, and we've most often, when we've tried to do that, we've been wrong. We made huge mistakes and unintended consequences, et cetera. What we are trying to do with Sudan, and I'll give my colleague Chris Coons of Delaware, he's the chair of the Africa Subcommittee and the Foreign Relations Committee, is really focused on this. And the good news is he's also the lead appropriator over the Foreign Relations budget in the Senate. We're trying to make sure, and President Biden's been very good at this, that we have a more robust humanitarian aid presence to deal with hunger, to deal with famine. We are having a battle right now about how much COVID vaccines we're going to be delivering to the rest of the world. What we've done has been amazing, and not only has it been helpful to people, it's sort of bought some goodwill after, in the Americas, for example, decades where they could see China all the time, and the U.S. wasn't doing much. And they would rather deal with us, but if we're not there and China's financing a port project or a highway, well, okay, we'll deal with China. Well, they saw the U.S. deliver the highest quality vaccines and donate them, where China and Russia would sell them a lesser quality vaccine, often have a delayed delivery. Sometimes if somebody in the government said something nice about Taiwan, okay, well, we're cutting the contract off and nothing is coming. So I think with Sudan, the area where I am confident that we're going to be devoting resources on the humanitarian side of famine and other ways that we can help those in Sudan.
Thank you. Yes, please.
Good morning, Senator. My name is Karen Besser. I'm a resident in Fairfax, but I go to church here in Alexandria. That's why I'm here today. So much of what you said has been so positive and so wonderful. But when you summarized the changes that you felt characterized the past 2 years, and you listed a handful of things that are really substantive turning points in the life of the country. One that you did not mention, but that affects 50% plus of the population, is that during this period of time, women in the United States are losing their right to reproductive health choices and freedom in an unacceptable way. They were saved from it by the Supreme Court when legislatures and the Senate and the House would not act 40 years ago, and they're about to lose that. My entire working career happened during that span and was affected by that, and now women are losing that right. Isn't it time for the Senate and the House to act now, to come up to the plate? Because in 2 years, we may lose that option, less than 2 years, in a year, when the House has an election and possibly changes hands, and we will not have that ability.
It is time. Yeah, it is time. There is a really good piece of legislation that I'm the co-sponsor of. It's not a perfect piece of legislation, but it's necessary and good, called the Women's Health Protection Act, that would basically enshrine the basic holding of Roe v. Wade as a federal statute, so that your access to reproductive choice does not depend on the zip code where you live, but it is a national policy. That bill is like others. It's like the voting rights bill, or like changing Senate rules for voting rights. We have 49 out of 50 Democrats on that bill. We don't have a single Republican. Right now, unless we were to make some adjustments to Senate rules, we would need 60 votes to pass that. It has the votes to pass in the House, but it does not have the votes to pass in the Senate. We had a vote on this bill, it was either 2 Mondays ago or 3 Mondays ago. Janine, was it 3 Mondays ago? Yeah, I think it was 3 Mondays ago, and we got 49 Democratic votes. Yes, we did, because of the 50 Democrats on choice-related legislation, there's always at least 47. Senators Casey, Manchin, and I are Hyde Amendment supporters, and so we will support the Hyde Amendment. But Casey and I both voted for the Women's Health Protection Act to enshrine Roe v. Wade as federal law, but we could not get Senator Manchin. So that we either have to think about retooling that to get some Republican votes, or win a whole lot more seats. And I think the Senate is going to be like 51, 52, and 48, 49 for a while. I don't think we're going to be in a 60-40 Senate anytime soon. So one of the possibilities is Susan Collins has said she would support legislation to codify Roe versus Wade. Her opposition to the Women's Health Protection Act, I don't exactly know the pieces of it that she didn't like, but we have, as HELP committee members, started a dialogue about, okay, you said that you would be willing to do this. What does that mean, and how different does it look than the Women's Health Protection Act? And if you would support it, could we get other Republicans to do it as well? So I think the Women's Health Protection Act is a good starting place, but we know we're short 11 votes to get that passed. So we have to contemplate what can we do to try to get more.
Thank you very much. Skylar, and then I'll go gender. And then, so Skylar first.
I'm glad you're picking the question.
Yes, that's
Takes
right.
all the pressure off.
Good morning, Senator.
Morning.
Do you feel that our government is too fragile for justice? You mentioned January 6th of last year, and I just see that we are not fully pursuing the accountability to our elected officials. Thank you.
We're fragile. We're fragile. I remember after I was on the ticket in 2016, people asked sort of what I expected of the Trump administration, and I said, look, I think we're going to be putting the institutions of our democracy through a stress test. That was my prediction before President Trump was inaugurated after the election. We're going to put it through a stress test. How are we doing? We've survived the stress test. I can't yet say we passed it. I can say we've survived it. I can't yet say we passed it. And I think we're still under it. But the history of our country shows that good chapters often immediately follow bad chapters, and bad chapters often immediately follow good chapters. So I don't view the history as like we're always getting better, or if things go bad, they have nowhere to go but worse. I don't believe that. And as I looked at some trends, so the turnout in Virginia in 2017, turnout in Virginia in 2018, 2019, 2020, even turnout in 2021. The election didn't work out for the candidate that I hoped would win, but the turnout was massive, partly because the legislature had opened up the opportunity for people to participate. In fact, here's an interesting one. 2 Democratic houses in Virginia dramatically opened up the opportunity for people to vote early, vote by absentee, made it easier for people to vote. The turnout in the governor's election last November was up 20+% from where it had been 4 years ago. That's a win for democracy, even if my candidate didn't win. And it's the second biggest jump in turnout ever in modern Virginia history. The biggest jump was when my father-in-law was elected in 1969. From 1965 to 1969, turnout went up by 65%. What happened? The Voting Rights Act. And the U.S. Supreme Court, in the case of Harper versus Virginia, struck down poll taxes in state elections. So fancy that. Make it easier for people to participate, and more people participate. So I think the accountability in the sense of legal accountability, the DOJ, the House Oversight Committee, that's really important. And we're not there yet. We'll see what the House Oversight Committee does. I think the DOJ and others still have more. I say there's more shoes to drop off the centipede still. But for me, in the legislative branch, I think the most important accountability, the most important response is this voting rights thing. If it was about taking away people's rights to participate, then the answer is enshrining more protections to keep people guaranteed in their right to participate. And we're obviously not there yet, but we're not giving up.
Thank you very much. Yes, please.
Hello, Senator. Thank you for coming. My name's Allison. I'm actually a resident of Colorado. I'm a first-year student here, so my senators are Michael Bennet and John Hickenlooper.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
One interesting thing, kind of to bring the conversation back to a woman's right to choose, we've kind of seen a trend recently with everything that's happening in Texas and other states, where the necessity for abortions is not going away, it's just moving. Specifically, I'm talking about my home state of Colorado has seen a drastic increase in the amount of support that they have had to provide at their clinics from specifically women from Texas.
Yeah.
So I guess where I am struggling with some of the senators within these states, and even Senator Manchin, is this idea of being so pro-life and yet voting against protections for living children.
Yeah, like the child tax credit.
Like the child tax credit, like TANF, like going against SNAP. So I guess kind of what is your plan for those conversations with senators who, on the one hand, say, yes, I'm very pro-life, but then their voting record actually shows quite differently. In Colorado, prior to coming here, I was a social worker, and so I did child protection specifically.
Right.
And so the communities that I saw the most impacted were communities of color and also communities where mom and dad were not documented. But kiddos were born here, but they couldn't receive the services because
Right.
mom and dad weren't citizens, weren't technically here per whatever law. So I guess what does that conversation look like between yourself and other elected officials when it comes to kind of the hypocrisy, if I'm being honest, between saying you're pro-life but then voting against saving kids, realistically, like living, breathing, out of the womb children?
Yeah.
What does that look like?
Yeah, I mean, no, look, you ask a really good question. I am in a body of 100 people. 50 states each send 2. If I want those from Texas to respect those from Virginia, who have completely different views than they do, then I have to accord them some basic respect. And I'll be blunt, leading with a hypocrisy charge is not going to open a door for a dialogue. It's going to end the conversation. And that's an everyday reality. I mean, and all of you are in, group endeavors where you have to grapple with this. Okay, I'm in a group. It could be a parish council. I'm in a group. We have to make a group decision. There's some people whose views I strongly disagree with. Still, we have to make a group decision. How do we get there? The Senate is a really interesting social psychology experiment in that way because it's 100, kind of highly motivated people who all are there for a reason. It's hard to get there. So some are street smart and some are high IQ and some are the most persistent people on the planet. Anyway, they all get there. And then what are the ways to persuade? I will say, I've had a lot of conversations with Senator Manchin, particularly on the child tax credit piece and on the voting rights piece. I've had less conversations with him on sort of life issues. I don't exactly know why. If Bobby Casey and I voted for the Women's Health Protection Act because we thought Roe versus Wade should be restored, I wasn't surprised that he didn't vote it that way, but I haven't gone to him and said, hey, what was it about that bill that you didn't like? Because that would be important. Could we take one piece of it out and still have it be a really good bill, and then you would support it? So I don't know the answer to that question, and I should. But I've had a lot of conversations with him about these two. And I will say, I am somewhat mystified on the voting rights question. Now, again, he supports the bill. He did not support changes to the Senate rules to get the bill passed. And I made the case that Robert Byrd is your hero. Robert Byrd would love what we're doing, returning the Senate to what it was. So I'm still mystified about that. On the issue of the tax credit, we're not only friends, but we're next door neighbors. And there's a lot of Appalachian Virginia that's very similar to Appalachian West Virginia. Bluefield is, straddles the state line, and we do events down there together. And he has seen, this sometimes anecdotes form your impression rather than data. But he has seen anecdotally enough instances of aid coming to families for kids being siphoned off by adults to do things that they shouldn't do to make him really wary about that refundable tax credit. And we've gone at him with the data and, hey, look, but the poverty rate went down by 30%. Isn't that a good? We just haven't been able to penetrate that yet. But you can never close the door because maybe I'll think of the argument tomorrow, or maybe he'll see something tomorrow that will make him look at it differently. And I know you were not saying, hey, go call him a hypocrite. That was not your question. But you have it. Whatever people outside the body think about any of us, my job in the body is always to keep a door at least a little bit open with 99 other people. And so I try to do that.
Okay, we've got 3 hands. I'm going to take Woo.
And I'll give short answers.
So this needs to be let's take 3 more questions. So please.
Thank
Linda.
you so much. Thank you.
Reverend Thomas.
I thought I was sitting across the table to my husband, who worked for many years on the Hill in the Budget Committee with Leon Panetta. Thank you for all that you do. And I want to bring the conversation, let me put my glasses on so I can see, here to discuss reparations, right? When we look at the word reparation, it means the making of amends for a wrong one has done by paying money to or otherwise helping those who have been wrong. We're standing on the grounds that my grandfather worked as a laborer, could not attend VTS because of the color of his skin. So he was not able to officially enroll in VTS. But because of his love for God, the students would actually sneak him books, and he became a Baptist minister in Washington, D.C. So we stand on those grounds. Running through my DNA is social justice. Thomas Circle is a gentleman called General Thomas. He is the great-great-grandfather who fought in the Civil War. And because he was a Virginian, they thought he would fight with the Confederate Army. He didn't. He fought with the Union, which says that I'm against slavery. So my question to you, just very simply, thank you for all that you've done and said, what would you consider an appropriate reparation?
What a great question. So I don't know. I am a co-sponsor of Cory Booker's reparations bill on the Senate side, which is to study how to come at the reparations question. But I don't think I have an answer to, if we engage in that and if we study it, I don't yet have an answer as to what that would look like. But I desperately think it needs to be done because apologies have been made. I did an apology for Richmond's role in the slave trade when I was mayor, and I worked with others to do the same thing for Virginia's role when I was governor. And apologies are necessary but not sufficient because there's never been an accounting and then an evening of the scale, and it could never be evened, but even an attempt to even the scale. So I don't know what it would look like, but I think we have to do it. I mentioned Fort Monroe earlier. I persuaded President Obama to make Fort Monroe a national monument. It was a military fort. It got bracked. There was a clause in the deed meant that the fort got handed back to Virginia when I was governor. And we then went to President Obama early in his term and said, use the Antiquities Act to make it part of the national park system, which it is. But because of my work on that, I've kind of dug in deeper and deeper and deeper into this. And I said something on the Senate floor about a year ago that got people mad at me. I said, we didn't inherit slavery, we had to create it. And that made a lot of people mad. And they said, well, what do you mean? There's slavery in the Bible, there's slavery. I said, no, that's all true. I mean, I know all of that. But when the 20 and odd Africans arrived in August of 1619, they were slaves until they stepped on the soil, and they were still on the soil against their will, but there was no law of slavery, none. English law did not recognize slavery. The General Assembly started that same year. They had not passed law of slavery. Virginia did not pass a law establishing the status of slavery until the 1660s. And slavery sort of emerged as an act of will by the first Virginians. You know, first, white indentured servants would not be put into wills, but African indentured servants would be put into wills. What are you, property? Then in criminal cases in the 1640s, you started to see a differentiation. Two indentured servants, one white, one black, would run away. They'd get caught, they'd come back. The white indentured servant would have 2 years added to the indenture. The black indentured servant, it would be for life, or would be physically mutilated with no time added, meaning that everybody in the courtroom understood that it was already for life. Then in the 1660s, they cut off the path. There was a thought that a Christian couldn't be a slave, so the General Assembly did a law, no, being a Christian doesn't mean you can't be a slave. English common law was you inherit the status of your father, but so many white English men were raping enslaved African women and mixed race kids were being born that the General Assembly decided, wow, we need to switch this. And so they completely switched English law on its head and said you inherit your status from your mother, which meant that all the children born of these mostly forced sexual relationships now were not only slaves, but because they were slaves, the dads no longer had the obligation to care for them. Virginia became the first state to outlaw marriage between somebody was English and somebody was African. Basically, we didn't inherit this from anyone in this country. Was slavery an institution in the history of the world? Yes, but we inherited it from no one. Here's a good question. What was the first colony that passed a law establishing slavery? The first of the colonies to pass a law establishing slavery. Just somebody. Massachusetts. Massachusetts in the 1640s. Massachusetts was also the first colony to pass a law outlawing slavery. But there was no such thing on this shore in the English colonies as slavery in August of 1619. And it emerged slowly, and it was an act of will. I have colleagues who say it was a necessary evil. It wasn't necessary. The history of this country, if those Africans and those who came after just were treated as indentured servants, because there was a law of indentured servitude, you work for a period of time to work off your passage, which somebody else had paid. But while you're working, you can have a place to live, you can get married, you just have to do the work, and then at the end of the work, you're free. And often even get something, get some land or get something. If we had just treated the Africans who came in accord with the law of the day, the common law of the day of England, the history of this country would have been radically and dramatically different. So as I think about the reparations question, I don't know, there's so many thorny little questions to grapple with along the way, and I haven't thought them all through enough to know what the answer is, and frankly, there's no thinking through of those without having kind of like a South Africa-style Truth and Reconciliation Commission with all the different stakeholders sharing ideas, sharing stories. But to say, there shouldn't be, we should close the door and not have a reparations discussion, I think we need this discussion. I mean, let me just say it another way. If we divide the 400 years that Africans have been in the English colonies and the United States into 8 half-centuries, five of the 8 half-centuries, Africans were enslaved, and even those who became free, according to Dred Scott, were not citizens and could never have the rights of citizenship. So that's 5/8 of the history of Africans in the English colonies in the United States. 2 of the 8ths, the next 100 years, from basically 1865 to 1965, there was no slavery, but there was also rampant legal de jure discrimination against people based on the color of their skin. So it's only been in the last 1/8 of the 400 years that there has been legal equality, not social equality, but legal equality. And if you think about just the family wealth effect of accumulating property and practicing professions, and then the next generation gets to go to college, and then the next generation gets to go to grad school, and we get to pass wealth down. If you take people who have been here for hundreds of years and they're slaves for 5/8 of their history, and they're legally discriminated against for 2/8 of the history, and it's only been in the last 50 that there's some legal equality, I think the position that we can't have a discussion about reparations is nonsensical. But I don't know what the answer is.
One of my sad responsibilities is to be strict about time, so we're going to have one last question. It's Elizabeth. I know there are 5 or 6 hands. I want to stress that the Senator will be at a reception the moment this session's over for 10 or so minutes. Those 5 hands that went up have priority access
First
to the
in line.
Senator.
First in line.
Okay, so Elizabeth, please.
Hi, Senator Kaine. I actually have a question from the Facebook live stream.
Great.
Madeline from the Eleanor Crook Foundation, which is a U.S. philanthropy dedicated to the fight against global malnutrition, would like to ask you to speak a bit to the role of the U.S. in fighting global hunger and poverty. How can faith-based communities support policy decision makers to put these issues at the forefront of foreign policy, especially in light of rising global food insecurity crises due to conflict and climate change?
A good question and a very timely one. It's timely because not only are we grappling with a COVID bill, and will it include robust aid for other nations or won't it, is a point of discussion right now, but it's also timely because we are writing the appropriations bill for next year. We just passed one a couple weeks ago, very late for the fiscal year that started on October 1. But I think the next one will do more timely. And so we're already in dialogue about all of the appropriations. So the most important thing we can do is appropriate generously to USAID, which as a then contractor often, whether it's Bread for the World or many other strong NGOs, tries to go into tough parts of the world and provide humanitarian aid, food aid, et cetera. And some good news in the bipartisan front, this part of the federal budget has really strong bipartisan support. I'm going to give credit to two senators, Chris Coons and Lindsey Graham. They have gone back and forth as the chair and ranking of the Foreign Ops Subcommittee of Appropriations. And they're both very, very strong on humanitarian aid. And whether Lindsey was the chair and Chris was the ranking or vice versa, pretty much every year during the Trump administration, they proposed to just take a massive axe to any food aid and foreign aid. But we always were able to save it. And we had no problems with Republican votes in saving that. And I give Lindsey a lot of credit for that, and Chris also. So I think the question is not are we going to do something that we think is generous, and in a bipartisan way we will. The question is, will our definition of generous be up to the need? And so that's an important thing for NGOs to know is, look, there's multiple crises in the world. I mean, even just what's happening in Ukraine, what it does in Ukraine is devastating. But Ukraine is a food producer with food exports to many of the poorest countries in the world. So it's going to have this downstream effect on other countries that already have food shortages. So we will be bipartisan, we'll be robust. Will we be sufficient? We need Bread for the World and other organizations leaning on us about that to make sure that the appropriations bill we do is up to the moment.
Before I invite the Reverend Dr. Mark Jefferson to conclude this occasion with prayer and we move to the reception, I just want to take this opportunity, Senator, to say I think this is the first time I've heard a politician sing a hymn in the course of a talk. I love the fact that you found Hebrews from your memory, among other biblical texts you alluded to. I love the fact that in disposition and demeanor, you model a person of deep faith committed to engaging with the world and its complexity in the moment we live. So let's just show our appreciation. The Reverend Dr. Mark Jefferson, as part of our bicentenary, we have the phrase, "Go ye into all the world and preach the gospel," and have had that in our chapel for over a century. And part of his journey over this last 200 years is to preach 200 sermons. He would love an invitation to your parish church in Richmond. And I invite him now to conclude with prayer.
The Lord be with you.
And also with you.
Gracious Lord, thank you for this time that we've shared to wonder and to ponder, to be mystified and to be hopeful. Thank you for the ways that you've allowed this seminary to raise critical questions for this day. And thank you for the gathering impact that it has to help us sort out the affairs of this life. Bless us as we go. Allow us to be what you've called us to be. Allow us to be lights of your kingdom so that your kingdom will be manifest among us, not just now, but as long as you will have us here. We thank you, Lord, for this, and we ask you in Christ's name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you. That was excellent.
This is really